At the 2026 U.S. Open, a fan was thrown out of Shinnecock Hills for shouting, "Don't choke Wyndham," at Wyndham Clark as he tried to close out his second national championship. 20 minutes after Clark got the win, Scottie Scheffler, the man who had just lost his own shot at the career Grand Slam because of Clark, walked into his press conference and said something nobody in that crowd wanted to hear. That's the contradiction at the center of Wyndham Clark's career. The fans can't stand him, but the players who actually compete against him keep defending him. This video is about why. Clark has won 2 U.S. Opens. He's one of the longer hitters on tour, a former world number 3, and nobody in the locker room questions his talent. But ask golf fans what they think of him, and you'll get a very different answer. Because the same player who's twice been good enough to win the toughest tournament in the sport has also smashed lockers at Oakmont, thrown a club into tournament signage at the PGA Championship, and spent 2 straight years getting accused of bending the rules in his favor. But we're not going to spend this video relitigating every incident. We're going to do something more interesting. Look at what the players who actually compete against him have said, in real time, at the moments it would have been easiest to say nothing at all. Let's start with the breakthrough, because it tells you something the controversies don't. Clark won his first U.S. Open at LA Country Club in 2023, beating Rory McIlroy by a single shot. And Rory, watching from the clubhouse as Clark stood over the putt that would end his own chance at a 5th major, said something most players wouldn't admit out loud. "You don't want to wish bad on anyone, but you're really hoping for a 3-putt. You're hoping to somehow get into a playoff to keep giving yourself a chance," Rory said. That's not a compliment. It's something better than a compliment. It's honesty. Rory wasn't performing graciousness for the cameras there. He was admitting that Clark had put him in a position most players won't own up to, needing someone else to fail just to get what he wanted. Nobody says that about a player they don't respect. They say it about the ones who actually scare them. But the moment that really defined that Sunday didn't come from the guy who lost. It came from the guy who tied for 5th. Ricky Fowler had mentored Clark back at Oklahoma State, and the two of them were paired together in the final group, both chasing their first major. Fowler fell short, and on the 18th green, with Clark barely holding it together, Fowler pulled him aside and said something about Clark's mother, who had died of cancer a decade earlier. "Your mom? If she'd been here, she'd have been very proud." Fowler had no idea yet whether Wyndham Clark was about to become one of the sport's biggest stars or just another name people forgot within a year. In that moment, he was just being a friend, telling another friend the one thing that actually counted. The rest of the tour noticed too. Justin Thomas posted that night that Clark had become one of golf's next biggest faces. Graham McDowell, a U.S. Open champion, called him simply a good dude. 2 quick reactions, sure, but stack them next to what McIlroy and Fowler said, and you get a full picture of how the locker room actually saw Clark before any of the controversy existed. He was respected, liked, and taken seriously. What came next is well documented, so we won't dwell on it. The temper, the missed cuts, and a stretch where Clark seemed to be one bad round away from another headline. The moment that actually cracked the goodwill happened at Bay Hill in 2024, when cameras caught Clark's ball appearing to shift as he addressed it in the rough. Officials cleared him. But Brandel Chamblee wasn't happy about it. Chamblee said this on air: "I would respectfully disagree with the rules officials. I would respectfully disagree with Wyndham Clark. The ball clearly moved. He certainly didn't ground the club lightly. I don't need a video to see this. I saw it live, and I knew the ball moved. I think he should have been penalized." Chamblee's not a competitor, he's an analyst, and that's worth keeping in mind, because the standard he's applying isn't the same one a player applies to a rival, but the criticism stuck. And it's the reason that, by 2025, plenty of golf fans had already made up their minds about who Wyndham Clark was. Which brings us back to Shinnecock. Clark arrived at the 2026 US Open, carrying all of it, the reputation, the locker room ban, the sense that fans were just waiting for him to slip. He led wire to wire anyway, and the closer he got to the trophy, the louder the crowd rooted for him to blow it. The person with the most reason to enjoy that would have been Scottie Scheffler, who entered the day chasing the career Grand Slam and lost it to Clark. Instead, in his press conference afterward, Scheffler didn't talk about his own disappointment. He talked about what he just watched.
Winning major championships is extremely difficult. And like you saw that today, Wyndham started with a 6-shot lead, and it's just hard. It's a hard golf course. It's hard to win these golf tournaments. He had some stones down the stretch. He showed kind of what he's made of there with a great birdie there on 16. He was in some trouble off the tee. Wyndham has pretty good, I don't know if escapability is the right word, but he's, I would say, a very underrated scrambler. And I think you saw a lot of that today in some of the spots where he was and was able to make pars from.
Scheffler could have said nothing. He could have talked about his own putter, his own missed chances, and moved on. Instead, he spent his time in front of the cameras describing exactly what made Clark's week remarkable, which is not the instinct of a man who's bitter about losing. Sam Burns had even more reason to feel that way. He missed the putt that could have forced a playoff, watched it slide by right there on the final green, and lost by a single shot, closer than anyone else got all week. Minutes later, sitting in his own press conference with that loss still raw, Burns talked about the amazing golf Wyndham played all week.
To Wyndham's credit, he played amazing all week. That was really impressive golf that he played the first 3 rounds, and even today, I know he shot a couple over par, but it was playing really difficult this afternoon, and he did the right things when he needed to. So he's a well-deserved champion.
2 players, 2 guys who had just lost the tournament of their year, and neither one spent their moment in front of the cameras being bitter about it. A few days later, Xander Schauffele, Clark's Ryder Cup teammate, put across a finer point on what everyone had just watched. When asked about the hostility Clark faced all week, Schauffele said, "I thought he handled it incredibly well, and, like he even mentioned in his interview, he kind of used that as fuel to play even better and sort of prove it to himself more than anyone else." Here's the part that keeps this story from wrapping up neatly. A few days after Shinnecock, Jordan Spieth was asked about the hostility Clark faced, and instead of offering a simple explanation, he pointed somewhere nobody had really considered. Spieth's theory wasn't really about Clark's reputation, it was about money. He said, "I don't know how much of the Wyndham scenario was the fact that it was enticing to bet the field versus Wyndham on Sunday in a legalized betting state. And you could have had people out there that have $100,000 to $10,000, depending on who it is, on the field versus somebody else." In other words, some of that crowd wasn't just rooting against Clark because they didn't like him. They had actual money riding on him losing. Spieth wasn't defending Clark, and he wasn't attacking him either. He was trying to make sense of something nobody around him could fully explain. Why an American crowd turned this hard on an American golfer at his own national championship. That's the point. This was never as simple as Wyndham brought it on himself. The crowd at Shinnecock had already decided who Wyndham Clark was a long time before that Sunday started. The players who actually have to compete against him, the ones with the most to lose every time he wins, never seem to buy it. And that's the real story here. Not that Wyndham Clark is hard to figure out, but that the people still arguing about him the loudest are the ones who've never actually been around him.